If you pay attention to US news at all, you've probably heard that President Trump has issued an executive order to ban TikTok and WeChat. Now, this isn't the first ban that's occurred to Chinese apps or software that has foreign ties in general in the US. I remember a couple of years ago when Kaspersky antivirus was banned from use on government computers, and Best Buy, who I was working for at the time, did a recall on it as well. And boomers kept asking me if their computers were getting hacked by the KGB and they were able to read their emails because they had Kaspersky installed on their laptops. And TikTok was actually banned by the US Army already because it was considered a security threat almost a year ago. I wonder why that would be. And as far as WeChat goes, it's a messaging application without end-to-end encryption with servers that are based in Hong Kong and Ontario. Looking at WeChat's privacy protection summary, we can see a lot of the information that is written here seems similar to any other application or social media platform. It can basically be summed up as, we value your privacy and promise not to do anything spooky with your data. But again, the problem is that most of WeChat's servers are located in China, which is why there's been several documented cases from 2013 to 2020 of chats being censored, with a message that would occasionally appear on the screen saying that you're about to send a message which doesn't comply with the laws and regulations, but then eventually this notification just stopped being used, and if you said something that didn't comply with the laws, your chat just wouldn't be sent. And after the overwhelming victory of pro-democracy candidates in the 2019 Hong Kong local elections, WeChat censored messages related to the election, and they even disabled the accounts of posters in other countries, such as the US and Canada, to prevent them from trying to talk about the election or encourage democracy. In 2020, WeChat started censoring messages concerning the coronavirus, more specifically the number of cases, how things were being handled, the number of deaths, and specifically targeting the accounts of healthcare providers in China. So the censorship is not even a predefined thing. Nobody can really know for sure what can and can't be said on the WeChat platform because the rules are dynamic. They're constantly changing based on current events. I mean, I guess you could just say that anything which is critical of China cannot be posted on WeChat. Now, the thing that you have to understand about companies that are based in China, especially technology-based companies, is that the lines are blurred between these companies and the government. There's very strict censorship rules on the Chinese internet. You may have heard of the Great Firewall of China, which blocks many websites when you use the internet within China's borders. So it's impossible for a company in China to have a free speech platform and simultaneously comply with those laws. Not to mention that companies in China will often go for becoming state-sponsored because they get tremendous tax cuts and pretty much boost their net revenues compared to the more privatized companies. The only drawback of doing this, of course, is that the government gets an intense amount of influence over your company. They usually will institute a government employee on your board of directors, and from that point forward, China's government will pretty much decide the direction that your company goes in. But anyway, back to the bans in the US. I'm not totally sure how I feel about this. Personally, I don't use any of these apps, and I totally understand banning the use of them by people that are working for the government, like army personnel, because obviously if you're working for Uncle Sam, if that's your employer, then they're going to have a little bit more say over what you can and can't have on your phone when you're in the line of duty. But I'm not too sure that I understand the banning of its use by every citizen. If the goal here is to prevent Chinese influence and Chinese surveillance over US citizens, it's going to take a lot more than just banning TikTok and WeChat. There's certain social medias that you might think of as American, like Reddit, which are clearly heavily influenced by China. I mean, just look at the fact that TikTok was one of the most highly advertised applications on that site, or the fact that if you post something critical of China in most subreddits, your post is going to be taken down, but you can say whatever you want about the US government, which, by the way, already does mass surveillance on its citizens. So it's not just an issue of, it's not an ethical issue of mass surveillance. The message here is basically, hey, China, stop spying on our citizens. That's our job. Sincerely, the NSA, Google, and Facebook. So I think this ban of TikTok and WeChat, while it might cut down on some Chinese surveillance, it's really just scratching the surface. There's still US companies like Reddit, which are handing data over to the Chinese government. There's still a lot of Chinese investors that are investing in different US companies. The company behind Fortnite, for example, some of their major investors are Chinese. There's still going to be other Chinese apps in the App Store that people are going to use to just voluntarily hand their data over to the Chinese government. And there's still Chinese phones whose use is becoming more and more common in the United States because their specs are comparable to iPhones and Galaxy phones and other flagships, but the Chinese phones are still priced under $1,000. So even the more conservative people, at least when it comes to budgeting, are going to be handing their data over to China if they choose one of these phones over the more expensive brands. And as far as the Chinese propaganda in the US goes, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but when I was going to school, we really didn't learn anything about China. At least we didn't learn anything about China past World War I. We learned about them when they were doing the dynasty thing. We learned about them when it came to the Silk Road. But really, once you go past the Opium Wars in most US schools, you don't really learn much about China. The same thing in college. Most college kids don't know anything about Mao Zedong. They don't know about Red China. They don't know about the 50 million people that starved to death under that communist regime. They don't even really know about some of the things that I mentioned here about modern China, like the influence that they have over companies, the Great Firewall. None of that is really discussed in our schools. So again, the Chinese surveillance, the Chinese influence, the Chinese propaganda, it's a whole lot deeper than just a social media app and a messaging application. But hey, at least it's one less social media that exists in general. Maybe more people are going to start going outside for once and stop succumbing to some of the horrible things that social media in general just does to our culture.